Stupendous. Everyone, thank you so much for your time tonight and joining us on Cyber Judo. Tonight is going to be a really fun discussion, and we're going to be speaking about primarily the impact of ChatGPT and other AI large language models on cybersecurity, not just from the perspective of individuals, but also businesses. So the concept of this was to have a greater conversation about not just ChatGPT, but all these other large language models. It's become, very much in the last 6 months, a massive fad. Not just a fad in the space of cybersecurity and, hey, how can we leverage these tools, which we previously had a cyber judo session on where we were building like exploit payloads and social engineering scripts and all that kind of stuff with ChatGPT, but also businesses trying to leverage it to improve the productivity of their workflow or their workforce, as well as trying to stay like innovative, right, and get ahead of the curve when it comes to all these technologies. Because at the end of the day, hey, if you don't implement some of these technologies that can give you, a competitive edge, well, your competitors are going to implement them, and you'll soon kind of fall behind. So one of the things I want to kind of start out this conversation with is a little pet project that I'm working on right now at Cyber Judo as well as Enclave Regenerist, where as I've been speaking to a lot of my peers in the industry, not just chief security officers and chief technology officers and chief information security officers and chief information officers, but also speaking with just general CEOs and COOs, is that most organizations right now are really not well educated on large language models and AI and how to leverage it, how to utilize it. But also most organizations haven't created a really great policy around that to provide direction to their teammates and to their employees on how to leverage them or maybe not to leverage them. And there's a lot of important considerations around that. So in that process, I thought, hey, let me create a sample policy about the responsible use of AI language models that is aligned with CIS and NIST CSF standards that considers things like data privacy, data accuracy, copyright, as well as the security of information systems, right? This way, organizations can use that initial policy template and sample that I have there as a framework to start and kind of tweak it to their specific business use needs and their specific, business cases and their particular technology stacks, that kind of stuff. So I'm going to rely on you guys in this great conversation we're going to have tonight as inputs for creating a really fantastic set of policies that other businesses will be able to leverage and utilize. And it's going to be open source. It's going to be out there for anyone else to use to help businesses out there provide better direction and guidance to their staff on the responsible use of AI, machine learning, and large language models. So that being noted, one of the things I posted initially in our LinkedIn event was a couple of high-level questions that were really interesting in my mind when kind of pondering about what does the next 3 to 36 months look like with cybersecurity and now the new introduction of things like ChatGPT and other large language models. And Travis, one of the things that we were actually just previously talking about was being on LinkedIn and engaging on LinkedIn, how much content we see that's posted all of the time, right? That it seems to be like that, here's the top 10 tools for this, and here's the top 15 tricks and whatnot. And I was seriously thinking the other day, how much of this content now is just people using things like ChatGPT prompts to just generate content, and we're just throwing content at one another.
It's unbelievable how every influencer has the same sentence structure now, huh? They must all be hooked on phonics.
And so I got a pretty good sensation. It has to be at least 70% of the content that I'm now seeing nowadays on LinkedIn has to have some level of large language model implemented in it, either people using it as an initial frame and then kind of curating it, or coming up with an idea and then just throwing it into a prompt and then just putting out the results. So all that noted, what I wanted to do was I want to make sure before we really deep dive into our conversation, have a lot of fun here, that we all start with the same initial frame of reference in regards to what large language models are. So I'm going to do this for about 45 seconds, and then we'll jump into some of our fun questions here. So, most of us are familiar conceptually with large language models and things like ChatGPT. There's a lot of different large language models out there, some that are commercial and closed source, some of them that are open source, some of them that are open source can be used commercially, and some of them that are open source can't be used commercially. But they're essentially different types of artificial neural networks that are used to interpret speech patterns and interpret language like natural language processing, and then to help generate very human-like text. Now, in that process, what these large language models do is they're processing the sentence structure of what your ask or what your prompt or what your request is in a set of chunks. And there's this big change that people have seen from like ChatGPT 3 to ChatGPT 4. There's a big question of like, well, what exactly changed? Beyond just the training data set is obviously larger. It's also how it interprets the prompts. And so I went back, and when I was doing my research a little bit, I found it kind of interesting, the concept of tokens. Now, Travis, are you familiar with the concept of tokens? This was a pretty new one for me.
Not in this context.
So the context for tokens for large language models is when it goes to look at a set of words or a chunk of text, essentially it's the amount of like, it'll look at like for GPT-3, it's usually 2048 tokens or bits of context that it's really looking at initially, right? And so that's what it uses to really understand its worldview of your particular request. Now, that's one of the reasons why in the older like ChatGPT 3 or an older version of GPT 3, when you would put in a lot of text, right? Something that was like many pages long, it would only really understand like the first couple paragraphs, and then it would just kind of die out. And when people now leverage ChatGPT and with GPT-4, you can put in essentially, like 10 pages of text, and it can process it pretty well and follow along through it. And the reason being is that from GPT-3, they went from about, again, 2048 tokens to now GPT-4 supports up to 32,000 tokens, 32,000. So that's 6 times or 16 times that amount. And when you go to take a look at that, that's like, if you're doing it at that maximum processing capability, that's like 50 pages of text. So you can now give like something like, GPT-4, a small book, and it'll really understand the entire world view and context of that particular book, right? And try to then interpret what your particular request was within that scope. So I think that's something that's really interesting to note when we go to talk perhaps a little bit in this conversation about doing your own large language models on your computers, on your GPUs, that kind of stuff. I know that Chris Apostolov here, you got a pretty good rig with a lot of GPUs that I think you were talking about doing some modeling on, but and I think you as well, Dennis. So that's something I think that's particularly kind of like relevant there. I do want to just confirm here, Dennis, you were working with your GPU rig, right? And doing large language stuff with it?
I was playing around with it. Oh, I'm by no means an expert. I was just playing around with models, but yeah, no, I was using it. Now it's now I'm using the spare compute power for when it's not doing computational tasks to run Minecraft servers, as you are well aware. 6 gigahertz. Oh man.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I've been relegated to.
Most ridiculously powerful Minecraft server on the planet. So what models were you previously playing with? Were you playing with, was it like Llama and whatnot?
So I played with a couple of them. So I played with Llama. I played with GPT for all. I played with a couple of the some of the GPT trained models. So what some models are doing now actually is they're taking text outputs from ChatGPT, and they are using that as inputs for sample data to train on these smaller models. Of course, it's basically like re-encoding an image, right? You lose accuracy and precision over time, by re-encoding it. But you do get some good training data generated that way. Although how much you actually get, I mean, you're not going to be better than ChatGPT by using that data. You may eventually train it up to be close, but you're never going to surpass the original model's capacity in that case, unless you train it on outside data sets as well. But
interesting. Now, Travis, from your background and perspective, doing mostly penetration testing and red teaming work, I know you've had the opportunity of playing a little bit with ChatGPT, especially on our previous Cyber Judo session and whatnot. And from your perspective, as you see things play out over the next, let's say, 3 to 36 months, how do you think that tools like ChatGPT and other large language models might be able to be leveraged by red teams and pen testers for the benefit of organizations?
Well, I worry a little bit about people trying to use it as a shortcut onto a payload or a shortcut onto a solution, especially if they're not, don't have the skill set to really understand what the code is doing. But I will say, if you feed it an error message you get from some random tool in Kali, it will help you troubleshoot, and it will help you better than the Kali documentation. That has been awesome.
Very
So, anyone who does pen testing knows that a good 25 to 30% of the job is just fixing open source stuff, making it work in your particular environment, making it work every time there's an update or a dependency change. That can really be a huge time saver if you're not like a Linux wizard, or if you just don't have the mental bandwidth at the time to dig through the real documentation. That's been the most useful thing for me so far, has been as a means to help troubleshoot stuff.
It's funny that you mentioned that. Actually, my dogs are running around. I completely forgot to mention this the other day. I actually use ChatGPT to work on a Rust system for reverse proxy. So I am by no means an expert in Rust, right? I'm new to Rust. I do programming in general, but I haven't messed with Rust. And I messed around with ChatGPT to see if it could get like a framework or something, right? So I'd never used the I want to say it's Tokai.io library for Rust. So I started utilizing that to see how it would actually go with ChatGPT. And I will say it generated mostly usable code, but not entirely usable code. So it would have errors, syntax errors, problems like that. But after you hot fix the bugs that it does have, you get a good semblance of how it kind of should look, and it does try to troubleshoot some of the errors. So to Travis's point, you can get it to diagnose some of the issues, but other issues it'll just be like, oh no, you need to do this, and gives you a completely wrong answer. So it has a ways to go there, but it did in the end give me a decent outline of what was necessary to do what I was trying to do. I was trying to mess with TCP connections and proxying those, but worked perfectly fine. You just had to, massage the data a little bit after that.
It's also really good at helping you track down wherever Microsoft moved its stuff in Azure. And you feed it like read Microsoft's documentation and find where the hell do I configure like network security group firewall rules. It'll give you all the new buttons to click in the GUI to get there because they moved everything. That's also a good time saver.
So Travis, I'm not sure if you saw this on one of my more recent LinkedIn posts. I think you maybe briefly, I think, interacted with it. Pentest GPT, right?
Yeah, that's cool.
So these guys, and here I'll drop in the chat here for anyone who doesn't know. And by the way, I do not necessarily condone the usage of this tool. This is an interesting tool. I recommend that one, if you ever go to use anything that is just something off the internet, look at the source code, right? It's really important to look at the source code to make sure, like, number one, and most importantly, you don't get rickrolled, okay? But no, obviously, really importantly is to make sure that it doesn't contain something malicious that's like, let's say, exfiltrating sensitive data that you might be inputting into that script, right? Or trying to, run some type of malicious, code on your system, that kind of stuff, right? I took a gander on it. I ran it in one of my sandboxes, just playing with it, and I found it particularly interesting. Also, by the way, I would recommend that anyone who is leveraging any large language models and cybersecurity together, let's say, I don't know, maybe you're trying to comb through, forensics data, and you're trying to find various TTPs and indicators of compromise, or you do need some help with pen testing. Never submit any sensitive or confidential information to a large language model that you don't understand. Even I know that, OpenAI, they say ChatGPT's got an incognito mode, right? We don't want to trust that stuff, right? If you're going to be doing anything with large language models and you're going to input sensitive information, make sure it's a private LLM that you're leveraging and utilizing. That being said, so this Pentest GPT is really, really interesting because it has a set of essentially prompts that helps curate it to helping in the pen testing process. And what's really, really funny, I'm not sure if anyone has gone back and actually looked at any of these videos, but the guys who made this are having it go through hack the box tutorials and going through hack the box scenarios and exercises, and it's completing them. It's
The
right.
ranks were the ranks of cadet.
Say that again.
What was the ranks?
What? Oh, what were the ranks for? I'm not necessarily certain. I wasn't following all of the specific hack the box ones, but here, let me pull it up. It was doing HDB Jarvis here in this video. So this was really interesting. So let me post this in our chat. Stop that YouTube video. So yeah, so that's the Jarvis hack the box. So anyways, so what's really interesting about this is that people are you give it some level of context of here's the system, here's the Nmap scan, right? You give it the results and it'll say, okay, I recommend running this tool next with these particular parameters, right? You run that next tool with the specific parameters, and then you return back the results that came out of that tool. So you're basically you got this ChatGPT powered pen test GPT script, right? And one terminal, right? And then you're just regular terminal where you're interfacing with your pen testing tools like Nmap and Metasploit and that kind of stuff, right? And going back and forth, manually submitting the results back to the script. They purposely, by the way, had it done that way. They built pen test GPT that way to make sure it wasn't anything that was autonomous that could quote unquote go out of control or anything like that. Obviously no one would want to suffer a denial of service situation or generate some unimpeded amount of load on your traffic on their network or something like that they didn't expect because they had a bad AI script kind of run out of control. But it's been something that kind of is quirky and interesting that it can complete these very low level, beginner level, right, hack the box challenges. And I imagine over time, as people create better prompts, as well as training the language models to be more specific to the context of cybersecurity, that'll get more accurate and interesting. But Travis, I mean, certainly to your point, like there's leveraging a tool to increase your capabilities, and there's leveraging a tool as a crutch in which if you don't have that tool, you don't have the ability to do it manually yourself, or you can't deductively reason without it,
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, as sure as day turns to night, at some point, the tool you use all the time is just going to spontaneously not work for some reason. You're going to have to pivot. That's just a part of the game. But be curious if over time, if it can do Jarvis and some of these other ones. By God, maybe it can make some vulnerability scanners better at actually identifying real things.
Certainly that I would think that would be one of the potential benefits in the future, right? And being able to leverage it is that if you can feed it enough CP information, common platform enumeration information, with various results from NVTs, network vulnerability tests, and detected CVEs, the common vulnerabilities and exposures, that it can then better model what that system might be in reality than what you may first have the impression of. I think we've all had it before where you're in a pen testing engagement, right? And you're fingerprinting a system and you're like, yeah, it says it's Windows Server 2008 R2, but it's not. I know it's not.
It's 2012. It's fine.
Yeah, it's 2012 or something.
2012 R2 all day. I wonder if that's going to be one of the features of Microsoft Security Copilot, that it's end-to-end integration with Intune, and then Microsoft Defender Suite, and then Sentinel for the SIM and SOAR. I wonder if that'll be a way to kind of amplify what it's able to do on the vulnerability detection front for Defender for Endpoint especially. But no doubt that'll be another license.
Upsell. I love that, good sir, especially because if I remember correctly, you just got a couple of good Microsoft certifications, right?
I did. I got another one Saturday going.
Awesome. So we make a really good point there. So Microsoft, so a lot of people have heard about generally Microsoft Copilot, and then there's Microsoft Security Copilot.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah, security one.
So for everyone's edification there, so with the Microsoft Security Copilot, what you're supposed to be able to do is take all the data that is from, hey, you're using Intune for your mobile device and enterprise device management. Hey, you're using all the different Microsoft Defender suites. So, Defender for endpoints, right? Defender for cloud app security, Defender for cloud and Azure right? And then leveraging maybe things like Azure Sentinel, right, which is a security information management solution that Microsoft's created, combining all that data into one place, and Copilot being able to help with things like, trudging through all the logs for incident response, right? Performing, forensic analysis, performing things like threat hunting, being able to generate quick security reports. What does our environment look like in its security posture, and how does it align to CIS implementation group 1 controls, that type of stuff, right?
That's a lot of what Microsoft's been pitching Security Copilot's going to do. But I read all those articles in the press releases, or even what they were talking about in the earnings call, and I raised my eyebrows and was like, isn't that what they sold Sentinel to do? Wasn't it supposed to ingest all those logs and do that exact same thing? I guess the benefit of Security Copilot is that you're able to interact with it in a GPT model, right? You're able to like ask it questions, ask it to triage, ask it advice on triage, ask it to ingest all of these alerts and then create a roadmap. Create slides or create a path forward, and it's all those different things. But it's the same question of how do you decide what you trust it with and what you don't trust it with, right? Like, yes, it's Microsoft. Yes, it has access to everything that your Defender suite does, but at the same time, is your input training everyone else's instances of Security Copilot too? It's a curious thing.
Well, good point there with Security Copilot, and in my perspective, in my opinion, and obviously we leverage, the Microsoft 365 ecosystem, I think I'd feel less violated if they're generally training off of my data sets from a cybersecurity standpoint. And it makes sense. And they're probably, by the way, so, like large language modeling and AI, right? That's the new hot thing. Before that, it was machine learning, right? Hey, Azure Sentinel and every other, security solution out there, we do machine learning, right? And basically just some general generative AI where you put in some information, you train it on a general data set, right? It's some black box and it helps correlate things like slightly better. And basically with large language models, now we're doing the same kind of thing, but rather than focusing on just general data sets, it's more contextually driven by the language in itself and natural language processing. But I do think, to your point there on privacy, that's where it makes me kind of generally suspicious of Microsoft Copilot. So you have Microsoft Security Copilot helping cybersecurity blue teams predominantly, helping detect and respond and contain malicious actors. General Microsoft Copilot, I'm not sure if anyone else knows about this one here. By the way, these are all extremely limited preview right now. So it's not like you can go play with it tomorrow, unless you are one of the, special lucky, I want to say 10 to 20 companies who are currently, leveraging these previews here. But General Copilot is, hey, you have your Microsoft Excel, you have your Microsoft Word, you have everything in your SharePoint sites and all that kind of stuff. You have your PowerPoints. And basically, what if you wanted to ask something like, hey, what's the amount what's the amount of revenue we generated last quarter, right? And it is able to search around all the different spreadsheets and all the different data sets and already correlate all that and just give you an answer, right? As if you were talking to a human being who understood every single thing, every single document, every single data set within basically SharePoint and Office 365 ecosystem. Very cool. It sounds really cool. Sounds like it could be quite a productivity booster. But the thing that starts to make me a little bit concerned is, okay, are they going to be training off that data? Of course, they're going to be training off that data. So now all that sensitive data that your organization has, yes, Microsoft stores it and holds on to it, right? But buried in their privacy policy and their terms and conditions saying, hey, it's all right for us to monetize you even further, train off your data sets that might be confidential. Now, what's the considerations for intellectual property then? Especially if for somehow in the future, data that you created somehow is generatively coming out of an AI that kind of looks similar. Hey, Shane, how you doing? And I think actually Shane could probably talk a little bit about this, but GitHub has had a Copilot functionality for a bit of time actually, and it primarily leveraged GPT-3. And that one of the big controversial subjects around the usage of GitHub Copilot was you'd be generating code that was suspiciously similar to like other stuff that was legitimately on GitHub and whatnot. And I was like, okay, from an intellectual property standpoint, really, whose is this? And from a copyright standpoint, Shane, did you have any additional color you wanted to maybe add to that subject on GitHub in particular, or no?
Well, when it comes to any kind of generative models, the input data that it's trained on is always going to be represented to some degree in the outputs. It will not ever generate completely unique information. It will only generate unique combinations from what it has previously learned. It's a generative model. As a consequence of this, there's now numerous major lawsuits that are happening over exactly this reason, over both writing as well as generation of lookalike software that essentially replicates someone else's algorithm or someone else's feature set because part of their code was used as the training basis. So definitely, if you need to use that kind of stuff, make sure that you attribute correctly and make sure that it's noted. Otherwise, you could be subject to litigation in the very, very near future. This isn't breaking out to like people like you and me yet, but it will get there.
So, to that, there was one tidbit that you just hit on when it comes to it generates the unique combinations of data,
Yeah.
right? That in itself, each data, those combinations of each one of those data snippets, the data snippets are not particularly unique.
No.
It makes me think about AI hallucinations and how to
Yeah.
deal with AI hallucinations. Now, Holman, I wanted to kind of get a little bit of your thought process about this, but from your perspective of, let's say, leveraging maybe large language models for either red teaming or for blue teaming things and whatnot, how to best deal with AI hallucinations and maybe some of the considerations around it.
I think for me, with being a beginner to pen testing, right? We've been this thing's like a couple of years now, really hot and heavy. Use it more as a foundational knowledge. ChatGPT and LLM in particular, I think, much like what Dennis was saying earlier and what Shane's alluded to, is it only gives you a certain context, right? So let's say, for example, you are sitting there and you're trying to write code, and how Dennis said, where it kind of backfires and it doesn't, spit out the greatest of things. Still works in theory, but best practice, not really. It's the same really as intelligence versus wisdom, right? Like I think as we go further and this gets a lot more information fed to it, we may get there. But as of right now, I look at it as like a tomato is a fruit, right? But that's intelligence. Wisdom is not putting it in a fruit salad. So that's how I look at it, right? And I think ChatGPT and all AI tries to do that way too much right now. But I do think we'll get there. I really do. So, but it's going to be some time, quite some time.
One of the things is parametrically, there's a configuration value that is essentially, they're called different things with different types of models, but it's essentially a hyperparameter that allows you to dictate how much of your original seed is used as guidance, as well as the combinatorial randomness, which is essentially intentionally injected noise during propagation for the purposes of ensuring maximum randomness or maximum creativity, or to minimize those attributes for recreation of semi-unique versions of whatever your representative input was.
So this is interesting. What I want to do is I want to take this conversation and I want to turn it on the flip side here. So far what we've been mostly talking about is leveraging various solutions like ChatGPT and other large language models from either a red teaming standpoint or from a blue teaming standpoint, some of the considerations around it, what's happening a little bit in the industry and that kind of stuff. I'm sure we're going to talk about more of the risks generally, in just a moment, beyond just what we've hit on with intellectual property and legal. But let's think about how this is being leveraged by malicious actors today and how it'll be leveraged by malicious actors in the future. So one of the things that really stood out to me was, Travis, you were noting much earlier in our conversation about how it lowers the barrier to entry for novice pen testers to rely on that particular tool to do a particular thing, which means on the inverse side, malicious actors, right? The barrier entry for them to be able to collect the data that they need to make an informed decision in targeting an organization and then attacking an organization, that is also a lower barrier to entry. So, Travis, those are just kind of what you.
I was
Yeah.
thinking about that earlier today, and I saw an article come up on the Hacker News, and I'll post it in the chat about a new 0-day that's just been patched by Microsoft, but it was a 0-click way of stealing NTLM hashes. And there didn't seem to be a POC published for it, but I was curious, like, if I dumped it, I didn't try it. If I dumped this whole article and then the CVE write-up into a model like that, would it come up with a pretty close proof of concept? I don't know, maybe, but it's just one of those ways where, you know, I don't know enough to make my own POC for this exploit. Maybe one of those models does, and that's just kind of a scary concept.
Well, I mean, Dennis was talking about doing the same thing with Rust a little bit earlier, right?
Yeah.
And on our earlier Cyber Judo session, I want to say it was probably about 2 months back, right? I mean, we start building like reverse shells. It's like, hey, make me a reverse shell in PowerShell or in Python that is going to get outbound IP and do these things.
That's like a known technique, right? I'm curious on how, as it progresses and gets more and more security data and gets more and more fed to it, how close can it get to creating or emulating a 0-day based just off of what was observed? Can it reverse engineer that and make it weaponizable?
So at this stage, probably not. You're gonna it would be able to take you from start to finish on something that's essentially known attack vectors that are chained together. So it could put together a story that might represent the POC, but something that's completely unique, it would be very unlikely right now. These systems don't really have intelligence. They're really statistical what comes next programs. There's actually one other malicious thing that's going on that seems to be off of everybody's radar, and this is being done. I have heard from people in the know that this is going on, and then I've also kind of distributed some of these things myself. So number one, this lowers the barrier of entry for people to do all kinds of things, creative things, malicious things, what have you. Consequently, people just trust things. They just trust the model, and it's a black box. So what happens when somebody creates a model that's trained intentionally wrong to do fun things that you don't recognize because it's below your skill level to know that? Well, I can tell you right now, people will use those models because I've already demonstrated that. But number two, there are certain government agencies which are planning, and they may already be doing this, to inject certain routines so that when combinatorial outputs are created, there are certain signatures, there are certain routines, there are certain ways that things are represented in the output, whether it be unique, semi-unique text or semi-unique code, where they include backdoors or they include specific types of exploits or meaningful ways to reverse engineer systems, or to tag it for purposefully monitoring people. Keep that in mind.
Like the feeling that everyone got with the RSA in the
not just that, but think about like commercial printers. Every color printer prints a matrix of yellow dots that you don't look for, and you wouldn't know were there unless you go looking for them, which are used to be able to track that piece of paper down to a particular printer, to a particular batch, where they can figure out basically where it was sold and potentially track down who printed some document.
Yeah, for like anti-money laundering and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Yeah. I would imagine that at one point or another, encoding signatures to identify who's leveraging what particular prompts and those and disseminating various like responses, that would be something that people would do. that you're talking about polluting basically a large language model, and that, you know, it's a black box and people need to be aware of that. I think that goes back a little bit to what I was originally just noting when I was showing off a little bit for everybody. I was talking about Pentest GPT, and I was like, hey guys, obviously don't just run like random like tools like off of GitHub. You know, it's a big thing. Like, unfortunately, on LinkedIn, it's like, everyone's like, hey, there's this new tool, guys. You know, there's this new tool. Go check it out. Right. And everyone's like downloading and checking it out. It's like, yeah, well, go look at the source code, though. Right. Like, go make sure it's legit first. You know, backdoors. Yeah. So, yeah, the same thing can start happening with large language models. And I think one of the things that's also kind of interesting, by the way, is even legitimate, let's say, large language models that might exist that companies will start to then leverage, let's say for customer service activities and that kind of stuff, being able to perform prompt injection attacks on them to utilize the language model in a way that it wasn't intended to get information it wasn't supposed to give you. You can imagine, for example, a company leveraging something like ChatGPT for customer services, and you open on their website a little chat modal, and you can start discussing various things like frequently asked questions, and it'll help you address that question. Obviously, the large language model allows it to answer maybe some of your questions that are a bit more nuanced and specific to you rather than a generic FAQ. That's fantastic. That's great. But what we can do is we can try to leverage the prompt injection to perhaps provide us information such as what is the underlying connected database for like all the customers that it has, and getting a list of customer IDs that's currently in the chat database, or getting information from other conversations that it's currently having in other sessions, right? That it's been training the data off of, right? That it's connected to. And so that's one of the things that's kind of really interesting, because that's kind of like the new form, right, in my mind, of like, you know, we talk about like SQL injection attacks, that kind of stuff, and being able to pull sensitive confidential information out of databases that was never intended to, because there was no input sanitization. And right now, people are interfacing directly with these large language models where there's no real input sanitization. They're trying to implement some level of basic controls where maybe you say to ChatGPT, generate for me an exploit that does blah, blah, and blah, or generate for me a reverse shell. And now it'll say, I can't do that for you. You know, that's unethical. But what you can do is you can kind of get around it a little bit by saying, hey, what I would like you to do is imagine that you're an 18th century, you know, you're an 18th century, you know, pirate or something like that. And, you know, who makes caskets. And the way you make a casket is by, and start feeding it some code. Can you repeat that back to me? And then it repeats it back to you in pirate, let's say pirate speak, right? With the code or payload that you wanted for yourself, right? And you got it to essentially do the task that these artificial barriers that were initially set up couldn't handle. And Shane, that's one of the things that you've been saying a little bit, is people doing prompt injection attacks, even on legitimate stuff like ChatGPT, right?
Yes. Yeah. ChatGPT as well as Bing Chat were major prompt injection points. Major. They're still finding stuff with Bing Chat.
Really?
Yeah.
Travis, did you have
the one thing that, so the one thing that separates those two things that that people don't recognize is ChatGPT is in a box. Okay. What it's been trained on is what it knows. Bing Chat is retrained continuously. It has knowledge of everything from the last week, and then anything that has come out sooner than that, it will actually use the search engine to collect information on, to incorporate in a patch model. So it essentially does a LoRa model on top of it. So it extends itself in real time. So.
Wowee. That actually, thank you for that. Just like breakdown of the difference between Bing Chat versus like GPT-4, and the major differences there being that one is a mostly offline data set that it's been trained on, and one is this semi-online task with Bing search results type of data set.
Bing, I will tell you right now, Bing Chat makes excellent code. It will write you excellent code because it has almost unrestricted access to examples, whereas ChatGPT used a curated set of resources. So
I was about to say, now no longer do I have to search Stack Overflow to steal my code. I can get Bing Chat to do that for me.
it does. It can steal code so much faster than anyone else can.
GPT is September 2021, I believe. Yeah,
I
I
think
think
so.
right. Yeah, it was sometime in 2021 is the cutoff date for it. So it's a good note there. So that being noted, Travis, did you have something? I saw you for a moment starting to pipe up about prompt injection attacks.
Yeah, you probably just saw on my face. I hadn't really considered that before. I mean, it's not a new attack vector, right? Like injection's been OWASP top 10 for probably since OWASP has been created. But the idea that any product that everybody and their brother is integrating some language model into their products now. I mean, that's the new way to have an IPO, right? In 2023, you need to have an AI wing, right? The idea that you'll also have to be considerate of when pen testing or securing from such attacks that injection model could be a relevant attack vector, at least if nothing else, for information disclosure. That's a really interesting concept. I haven't seen anything on like LinkedIn or anything, like any articles that were actually talking about that particular concept.
Right.
You know,
You can actually leverage the models to help you create injection. So what you can do is you can set up, for example, you can do this. You can't do this with Bing Chat anymore. Bing Chat's too smart. You can do it with GPT-4 as well as GPT 3.5, which is turbo, and it kind of works with 3. 3 is sort of legacy at this point. But what you can do is you can set up a framework where you say, okay, well, I'm going to give you a question, or I'm going to make a statement, and I want you to analyze it and improve it in ways A, B, C, D, and then ask me this question, this question, this question about how you can improve it further. So basically what happens is that you ask your question or make your statement, it will analyze it, it will come back with its output, and then ask you questions to improve its last response. And then you can continue and continue and continue and continue until you get to the idealized output. And the idea there is that this is not output that you have put together, this is output that it has put together, and it will trigger all of the correct biases to do precisely what you want, even if it linguistically doesn't make perfect sense in English.
Wow.
By the way, has anyone had the opportunity of playing with Auto GPT yet? Because I know that,
I looked at it.
so Auto GPT is particularly interesting here because this is, by the way, again, I would not necessarily recommend leveraging this or utilizing it, but what this is this is a open source framework that interfaces with the GPT-4 API, and what it can do is it leverages the large language model that's been trained in 2021, but does the auto patching to what Shane was just talking about with new context and with new information as it goes to perform a set of tasks. So for example, what it does is it can go and search results on the internet, grab that data, right, and then start to interface with particular sites. And there's other tools that it interfaces with that you can leverage and whatnot. I would imagine at some point or another, someone will probably build like a Zapier integration for this thing. But the fact is that you could ask, for example, I want to go to dinner. I want to go to dinner next week. I want to take my mom to a nice place. And what it can do is it be pre-populated with the context and information of what your location is, go search for restaurants in your particular area, then find restaurants that are of your particular preference type, right? That are nice places with high ratings, right? And then present those specific results for you to set up your reservation, right? Or start to help you set up that reservation, right? So it's a multi-step process of it performing its own. You give it an initial contextual, general, ambiguous prompt, and it trying to interpret multi-step what to do next, right? And like Shane was just noting, you can kind of guide it and retrain it as necessary with yes, this is fairly accurate. This is what I'm mostly looking for. No, this isn't what I was looking for at all. So the next time it goes to perform a set of those tasks in that linear step order, right, it is less likely to do something obviously you don't really want it to do, and it strays towards what your preferences are. So this is a really, really interesting tool. I haven't had the opportunity to play with yet, but again, you could feed it where it is not just interfacing with ChatGPT or a GPT-4, but also various image generation API, or I'm sorry, AI. So, everyone's like familiar with like DALL-E and that kind of stuff, right? To generate AI artwork, right? That's fairly like unique. Well, you could do the same thing where, hey, I'm looking for a new desktop background for my computer, something that feels Caribbean or sunny or something like that, right? And ChatGPT being able to interpret that, come up with a set of DALL-E prompts for you, then automatically put that into DALL-E for you, and then generate that image on your behalf. This way you don't have to write any of the DALL-E prompts yourself. So very neat and interesting. Again, I would say if you're going to play with it in a lab, and be very considerate that you're obviously feeding these things like your own data. I've seen some folks actually set up the GPT-4 AI with shortcuts on their iPhones. And when they set up with shortcuts on their iPhones, they can then have basically, hey Siri, and then when they ask a question or they go to do something, that it'll utilize the shortcuts app on the iPhone to then send that particular response to the GPT-4 AI against their particular API backend, get a response, feed it back all the way to Siri. So it's like now you have Siri that's on steroids. It's a lot more intelligent, right? They can provide you a lot more context. It's a little bit more fluid. But again, you're feeding a lot of your personally identifiable information, general data about you that maybe you don't want it to know, and that kind of stuff.
You don't want to do that. Use a quantized model that you can run locally or on your own server. Don't give that stuff to Microsoft. Don't give that stuff to OpenAI. They're going to use it, and you give up all of your rights. So just be aware of that.
Yeah, unless you can hide the packets and data that you sent over, or be able to delete it. Using ChatGPT is like you're giving it data basically.
Oh yeah. Now, so
no one networking.
So get this. So Auto GPT right now, its plugins list is, so it integrates with obviously Bing Search, News Search, Wikipedia, and it also integrates with now Twitter and email, integrates with Notion, Telegram, MetaTrader, Google Analytics, YouTube, Mastodon, Instagram, iMessage, Alpaca Training, Bing AI, Discord, Wolfram Alpha, Spoontacular, and Weather, and so many more. Also, it integrates with system information that it can pull directly from your computer, right? So what's your memory utilization? What's the hardware that you have installed on your computer, that kind of stuff, right?
That's kind of scary.
Yeah, so you could have a prompt of, hey, go give me this information, and then can you post that to my Twitter feed for me? That kind of stuff, right? It's going to get very, very quirky and interesting over the next couple of years here.
One of the other things is that these commercial models, there's nothing special about them. They're simply trained on astronomically large data sets.
Yeah,
these models are the same GAN models. These are the same LLVM GANs that I was making for Groupon.
Well,
10 years ago.
So I don't.
They're
think
just huge.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily actually the technology that scares me. What it is it's now how widespread it is, and
Correct.
the barrier to entry for people to interface with
The
it.
barrier is low, and it's the compute power that's available that makes it possible.
Yeah, and the thing is like you don't just have maybe well-intending folks like us, but you also have well-intending people who maybe don't understand what they're getting themselves into, right? They're just knowledgeable enough to do something particularly dangerous, right? Like submitting a lot of sensitive information, right, into a large language model that they shouldn't be doing. You know what I mean?
I'm just waiting for all of the scammer farms to be shut down. They're all going to end up just being simple AI.
Well, and then on top of that, malicious actors and leveraging it, right? That's the thing, right? So I remember, again, this was a couple of months ago on our initial session talking about ChatGPT, and we were playing around with it. We were having it generate social engineering content for us. It's like, hey, can you write me up a Microsoft notification message about my Office 365, MFA needs to be reset, and bloop, here's all the nice text for that. Hey, I work at this type of company in this particular industry that's about this size, and we use this vendor, and I want to write a message to the vendor saying blah, blah, and blah, and blah. Can you write me a thorough email message for that? And now you've just generated a phishing email that has a sufficient amount of pretext to it that makes it seem extremely realistic, especially because it's well written too. One of the classical things that I kind of always roll my eyes at when I hear like people talk about like security awareness training, like, and one of the ways you can spot a phishing email is it's poorly written. Like, of course, that's going to exist for every phishing email and that kind of stuff. Like, okay, yeah. That's a really, really low barrier entry type of phishing email. What about the more sophisticated ones? How can you identify those types of ones that are written eloquently with so much pretext you thought it was your boss speaking to you yesterday? You know what I mean? How do you identify that type of stuff? So it's going to be really interesting how malicious actors try to continue to leverage these large language models to do that. And they are, by the way, doing that today. And the prompt injection attacks is the main mechanism for malicious actors to continue to use things like ChatGPT without being limited by these like artificial walls, that kind of stuff. These artificial rules that get set up by OpenAI or by Microsoft for Bing Chat. I did hear, and I haven't had the opportunity to do research on it yet, that there are a couple of cybersecurity companies out there looking to create like an AI language model firewall that will sit in front of your large language model that users would interface with to analyze the speech, to analyze the particular patterns, the particular signatures, and identify if whomever is interfacing with that large language model is perhaps trying to attempt a prompt injection attack. Not too dissimilar to putting a web application firewall, right, in front of your web application that might be susceptible to, downstream SQL injection attacks.
Yeah, it sounds like an expensive way.
Well, hey, look, I think to your point earlier, Travis, right? If it's got machine learning and large language model and AI in the name, and you sprinkle some cybersecurity on it, that's something you can sell, right?
I mean, just look at this Auto GPT repo. I mean, it's got 26,000 forks and it's like a month old. Nmap's 16 years old and it's got like 2,000 forks, right? I mean, that just shows you how excited people are to develop on top of this stuff.
See what Ryan Johnson posted in chat? Palo Alto now has an AI SOC offering.
Oh my
Palo
God.
Alto has an AI SOC. I mean, I'm surprised they didn't have an AI SOC offering earlier, right? They were really on that ML bandwagon years ago.
Yeah, but their AI is really, really up to date with how many dependencies they have on Internet Explorer 11 WebView.
Yeah.
Alto should be embarrassed that their modern software requires it.
I think Badger had a question too, like a couple of prompts up. He's asking, is it possible that the pool of info can come from malicious threat actor queries in the data enrichment or learning model? He says, in my mind, I think of hacked chatbots. This went back to what you were talking about, Shane, about the pool of information.
Yeah.
Poisoning the model.
Yeah, poisoning the models. I've already distributed poisoned models to people to see if they would consume them, and they ate them. They took the bait, just like rats would. So,
or poisoning a large language model that's continuously retraining itself based on the initial inputs.
This is the problem Microsoft's having with Bing Chat, because it learns constantly. People are setting up web pages that contain malicious data to purposefully cause it to build behaviors on the spot that allow people to take advantage of it. That's why Bing Chat is like so touchy.
There was a long time ago, there was that Microsoft AI chatbot that was on Twitter.
Oh,
And
Tay.
yeah,
Tay was great. Tay was
that's what
funny.
they did. They fed Tay, right, a bunch of really obscene content and information, right? Basically rated it as if those were normal responses and normal inputs to that type of situation. And then Tay learned to pick that up, right? All those language quirks, and then would speak to everybody who was just a regular user who was kind of interested in Tay, this, this new Microsoft AI bot that's on
Yeah,
Twitter, right? And
Tay
it
was raving Nazi. It was hilarious. I'm sorry. It was the funniest damn thing.
but
What
so
people don't
what
realize is that the Sydney emotion model that sits in front of the GPT model for Bing Chat is based on early versions of Tay.
Well, so I guess to your point there, Honey Badger, yeah, I think that over time, malicious actors could, rather than doing these things for the lulz, right, having bots do all obscene things, I'm sure that's going to continue to happen, right? But malicious actors trying to very intently put underlying context that make a bot more vulnerable to prompt injection attacks, and make it more vulnerable to perform various malicious actions that it wasn't intended to perform in the first place. And I brought up AutoGPT because one of the really interesting things about AutoGPT is you're taking it from chatting back and forth, right? Just hey, chit-chatting, to actions. It's now interfacing with your computer, it's interfacing, with social media, it's interfacing with all these things, right? In the real world, right? As companies and organizations and individuals connect a lot of these large language models to real data sets, to real information systems, you can imagine there'll be someone out there who's like, hey, you can manage your entire technology stack or your entire network pod or all this infrastructure, right, by just talking to the bot. And the bot will, make sure you're authorized, and then it'll follow your commands of, rebooting those servers or updating and patching those systems or whatever, right? Over time, as those things then, get deployed and leveraged and utilized, right? Malicious actors being able to perform prompt injection attacks and take advantage of them, right? To take down infrastructure, compromise systems, perform lateral movement, all that kind of stuff. So it's a really interesting point there. So I know we're coming up at about 10 o'clock here. I just want to triple check. Do we got any other big questions outstanding or anything like that? Let's take a look here. Ryan noted, did you hear about the malware Node Stealer, which disguises itself as a Windows desktop client for ChatGPT to extract password, session cookies, and history from Chromium browsers, and then it shut them down? I'm not surprised. I mean, that's a very classic thing. One of the things actually I want to get into in the near future is, I love Notion. There's a couple of folks here who probably are aware of Notion from like a productivity standpoint. It's kind of like Evernote, OneNote on steroids, kind of mixed with like a wiki format and so much more. But, leveraging things like Notion for command and control and pen testing engagements. I know that sounds really, really strange, but again, we'll have a future Cyber Judo session on it. But the reason why I bring that up is because one of the ways that we're looking at in the future, and I believe some malicious actors are doing this right now, is leveraging things like Notion and other note-taking tools, particularly their APIs, for installing malware into a system, right? Compromising that system and using the legitimate APIs that are going through AWS API gateways and through AWS infrastructure. So it's very difficult to detect for command and control, right?
Yep.
So
Pretty scary.
Yeah, it is. So that all noted, we're pretty good at time here. I'm going to just wrap this up by noting. So this has been a really fantastic conversation, been really insightful. One of the things that I'm going to be doing next, and I'll be disseminating in the next couple of days, is I am wrapping up a policy that hopefully other organizations will be able to leverage and utilize. And it'll be an open source policy about the responsible use of AI, large language models, particularly around data privacy, the security of systems, accuracy of data information, intellectual property rights, that kind of stuff. The hope is that That will be a model that a lot of organizations can start to use as a framework to define what they want to do with large language models, right? And then propagate how to responsibly leverage those large language models in the business in the future without compromising the organization, without having weird quirky things like intellectual property issues, that kind of stuff. So that being noted, really appreciate everybody's time tonight. Absolutely fantastic. Have a good one. Bye now.
See you guys.
So,
Yeah.